Thank you. Wow, I'm coming in from the side, which I might be perfect because I have a feeling that I might be a bit of a wild card for this event. I've come from Portland with some dispatches from the data frontier, so to speak, and my work, I'll tell you a secret as well, I'm not an academic, and all of the experience that I have learning and working with data science has been very instinct-driven, and the way that Hack Oregon works, it's a nonprofit which is driven by volunteers creating open source, data-driven software and telling stories about important issues in Oregon. And that might sound like a mission statement that kind of rolls off the tongue, but the actual experience of doing this is very gritty, in the trenches, and highly experimental. The format for today is that I'd like to actually take you through the entire genesis as to how this happened, because truly, it was not an idea that I had one day that we were going to have hundreds of developers from our local area and even across the country apply to come work for us for free. However, that is really what's happening, and it's hundreds of people working in a pretty streamlined fashion, like a pop-up open source company, to deliver actual products or pieces of journalism that move the dial on things like housing or minimum wage or campaign finance transparency in Oregon, but they can actually scale up to create a bigger impact. And through this process of figuring out actually how to lead this type of group, we have realized that we need to train a talent pool. And so by scratching our own itch in that way, we have, in fact, discovered something of a very interesting process which might be relevant to many other kinds of approaches to data science work. We prepared a video for you today. We just did a kickoff. This is put together pretty quickly from last week, where we did a summit for everyone to come and join teams. And if we want to, oh wait, actually I can turn this on myself. Okay. Here you go. 4 years ago, Hack Oregon was a group of just about 30 people working on one project. And now we're 400 plus people showed up today to join teams across 5 different projects working with the city of Portland. So we're working with housing, we're working on budget, emergency response, homelessness, and transportation.
I'm involved in Hack Oregon because I believe citizens should be involved in making our government work better.
I'm in Hack Oregon because I think data is a tool that should be harnessed by everyone, and Hack Oregon is doing that.
I love Hack Oregon because it's a chance to work with smart people in a way that is positive for the community.
I'm involved with Hack Oregon because I want to help break down the barriers between government organizations and our community and build new things together.
I'm involved with Hack Oregon because Hack Oregon moves at the pace of technology in a way that sometimes the city can't.
So if you have a really good data set, that doesn't just mean you have rows and columns, but it has an insight into the actual human experience.
I love to dig into the hard business of imagining that something should be possible, knowing that it could be possible, and then finding a way to do it. Okay, so we didn't have titles for people in that video, the ones that were giving the little clips, but there's government people that work within the Bureau, so we are partnered with the City of Portland this year. Means that our government partners are actually part of our teams. They're not just domain experts, they're not just data contributors. We actually will train them on some aspect of our technology so that they come to the table like peers. And other folks in that video, we have designers and technologists We work with distinct roles in very creative lateral control, although it's not a completely democratic organization in the sense that we make all of these decisions together, especially when it is so massive. So I think that the best way to really describe, before we even talk about how it works, because that's the most evolving part of all of this, but why people actually are going to finish an entire workday and then come spend their evening with us. Most of our volunteers will spend 6 to 9 hours a week with us in person, and even more time than that sometimes remote contributing and doing the coding. So fundamentally, as a volunteer group, we are not able to create the most cutting-edge technology, or we're not making the most beautiful agency work that exists. But every tool and every piece of insight that we do create is fundamentally coming from a place of a relationship between data and citizens that doesn't really exist. That you can come after your work and think about an issue that you care about in Portland that has, let's say, housing or affordable housing. And the actual director of the Housing Bureau has also come after his full day of work to this warehouse where there are some of the best data scientists and the best artists and incredible writers, user experience designers that are working on this strategically together. And then outside of that red tape, just slightly adjacent to the framework of government, adjacent to academia, adjacent to actually tech as an industry, we move outside of all of this red tape and we can create something that at the end of this process is maybe imperfect, but that represents something that is fundamentally coming from a different standpoint and a different perspective. And it cuts through the often stale political discussion or polarized emotional tension that is issue-based. And so I'll say something maybe controversial. Often open data is talked about as the future of transparency for government. And fundamentally, that is not the reason that I do this work. And I don't think that that's the reason that a lot of our volunteers show up after a long day of work at night. I think it's more about curiosity and innovation. And so we see our data in the public domain, or even data that is in theory public but not accessible, as the material to drive this learning and curiosity and insight. And if those of you in the room who are developers or work in technology, which is, I'm thinking, a lot of us, you know that learning is a continual process and that you're never not learning new technologies. And so the spirit of talking about learning about data science, whether you're just starting out with Python or you are a machine learning expert, there is a way to link in those skills that you can contribute to the skills that you want to learn. And if you're at the top of that chain, you can push things even further because we are in a wide open space for insight and discovery when it comes to data that has most of the time never been online. And then you step back and you see all of the technology challenges that you have with moving databases or things that are maybe not even databases into an exploratory machine learning or machine readable format. So Hack University is a project of Hack Oregon. We actually train on every single part of our stack. We will have, for example, this year, we're working on an emergency response theme with the Fire Bureau. We found out that the Fire Bureau is really interested in trying to improve their emergency response time, of course. And they have been keeping a structured way of taking in emergency response every time a call comes in, how fast it takes them to get in the truck, how long it takes them to get on site, and all of these different scenarios that might happen with an incident. That all goes from 31 different fire management areas, and they send it to the Central Bureau, and it goes to an Excel file, which it sits on a server. No one has ever looked at it. They can do annual performance metrics at the end of the year, but they can't look at, especially not in real time, what might be happening with fire management number 17, right? And so this is an awesome opportunity for us to teach people how to build databases. And it's also a great call to action for data science. What happens with the weather, or what happens, what causes delays in emergency response, or we want to talk about making that interactive into a dashboard. If it's connected to the database, we can do a lot with data visualization, which could be custom. We can even find that there are stories in this data. We'll make individual experiences, which might be artists working with HTML and CSS to create something which is very curated and crafted. And then after all of this, right, we're going to deploy a system. And so we can teach DevOps. We are open sourcing APIs to this data, so we've got to teach web frameworks. So what Hack University does is it takes, well, we're running right now 10 courses simultaneously. They happen in the evenings. They're 6 hours a week. And they're taught by experts that are part of our volunteer leadership crew. And so they're small classes, and every single person in that class gets plugged into a project. And their project work is dependent on the entire system at scale also doing its work, like simulating an open source company. And so that is a fantastic way to actually learn data science because it's very real. You're dealing with messy data, and also we really don't know what the outcome is going to be. The stuff is not coming out of a can, and there's a very strong call to action to be able to work with civic leadership to help use information to make good decisions. And on the other side of that, there's something, back to the experience part, that speaks even more, I think, truly to why we do this, because every time that you answer one question with data, you end up with just 5 more questions, right? We're not necessarily going after things to find conclusive answers to what is good or what is bad about our city, or what is the right thing to do versus the wrong thing, but that there's an ephemeral nature to even the topical interest of some of these things. But the idea that somewhere out there, there's a belief that the people in charge might have a master information system where they actually are making decisions from a place of knowing about many different kinds of sophisticated details. And we find that even the most basic information that we do have is not ready for analysis, or it isn't accessible even to leadership, let alone to the public. And so when we try to take this information that is essentially inaccessible, and not only through that process make it available to answer questions for people, but that it is in collaboration with the leadership that really wants to use it. So it's a dual pathway for not only our, that the same information that a leader might use is the same information that's available to the public. And I can roll the tapes back even a little bit farther and tell you just more specifically how Hack Oregon grew through looking at campaign finance transparency as a challenge that grew our group, which was initially about 30 people, into the 250 people that we have today. And I think, so I used to work in campaign politics. I was very good with tracking finance data. And the name of the game there is to figure out, well, where is the money going? And then maybe try to intercept some element of that, or divert some money over here, or try to be one step ahead. All of that is a database that is public record. You're required to report campaign finance data. So I'm all the time on the state website. And I didn't think of it like data at the time, but I did notice that there was such a difference between talking to voters and what they seemed to understand about what was going on with the election and what was talked about behind closed doors and what it seemed like the campaign politics machine knew was going to happen in the election. And there would be, if you go 18 months ahead of the election, there'd be a straw poll. And you ask everybody who works in the local party or something like that, who's going to win the upcoming election. And before candidates had even announced that they were running, they're right about 90% of the time. way, way, way before anything happens. And of course, they're wrong a bit of the time too. But I started to think, what happens where, is this predictable? Are those times where we're wrong? Is that a learning opportunity to try to read intelligence into the systems? Does it have to do with networks? How do we get very small with looking at our campaign finance data? Because if it is predictable and we can make that transparent, wouldn't we be able to actually engage more with the grassroots public about how to make sure that this is right, that we feel okay about this, and not to say anything about a particular candidate or a particular party position, but that what goes on between my mind and this screen of a spreadsheet of transactions, why can I read stories into this? Because I have the context. And why can regular folks, why is it so hard to explain? Can we build this into a system? And I thought that I would, so I left the party, start to pursue this as building software. And I thought I would fundraise, come up with, how much is it going to cost to build the system? And I got laughed at by developers, and they said, this does not really exist. And but you know what? The first thing that you need is to build a scraper so that you can pull that data off the website, because there's no API. The only way to get it was to build a little robot that would copy and paste this and put it into a database for us, or actually more to like an Excel file, and then we would build a database. And so we found somebody who's like, well, I know how to build the scraper, and let's get you the database person. And then, all right, let's actually start to do hackathons with this data. We can put it on an open API. And then we started to bring in more of the campaign finance, other folks like myself, to look at it and say, like, is this really true? What do you think? And so we're all working to the table together. And I realized that, man, I don't know if I can sustain all of this volunteer developer help for as long as it's going to take to actually build something that I can demo to somebody else so that I can get more funding to finish it. So what I ended up doing was pitching the local design college to allow me to teach this as a class. And the idea was to have a 1-to-1 ratio, which was a mentorship between essentially a diverse software engineering team and graduate students of collaborative design. And it would be beautiful. They would come together. We would have we could teach them a little bit of JavaScript, and they can, go through a design thinking process to try to, figure out how we can elevate this idea of information communication, and all of this will be run by the material of data science, or civic data campaign finance material. And the class was a spectacular failure in many ways. The students hated JavaScript. They did really not like to code. And the software engineers were, a little bit, it was hard to have that 1-to-1 ratio of a design student with a professional software engineer. And so what we did, I was just racing against the clock to finish and try to get a product by the end of it, and it didn't really happen. But we held a hackathon at the end and said, okay, well, everybody who, to try to finish this up, because I thought I would lose the software engineers after the class was done, and they 50 of them showed up. It was like we started out with 11 students and 11 software engineers, and they all brought their friends at the end and said, wow, we can't wait that this class is over, because now we can actually really get to work. And so it snowballed from there. We actually did launch a beta of this campaign finance transparency program, and we discovered that this methodology, while it was not perfect for the training of exactly the way that we were doing it, it did actually apply to other kinds of topics. So we started to explore approaching a minimum wage theme, or we would do a housing theme, or earthquake preparedness, things that are important and discussed in Oregon. So today, we went back to that original idea of training and trying to grow talent, because our necessity is, everyone that we work with is the public. And so we need a very deep and wide talent pool of advanced skills to be able to address every aspect of the technology that we want to do. So we train on it. And our volunteers, they do enjoy teaching, some of them don't, so we can create an incubated space to coach, and then we'll bring them into that active project environment. So if you want to learn DevOps, Sometimes it's hard to learn that just by practicing or learning from a book or learning in school. You actually need somebody to allow you to deploy a system, which might be worth $500,000. And so who is going to let you do that if you've never done it before? If you want to do user experience design, who's going to let you design a product that you have to have an engineering team build? It's too expensive to make a mistake. But for us, in this way, we are able to experiment quite a lot because we're driven by our fundamental desire, curiosity, and to think that we're grateful for all of the support and help at every layer to be able to approach these pursuits. And I think that we're running a little to the end of the time, but I'm very happy to take questions, if anyone has questions. Yeah. Well, we found that almost no one knows how to do it. So one of the biggest categories that we have for data science in terms of interest would be, we have Oregon Health and Science, OHSU. We have a lot of researchers that are maybe have experience coding with R or academic. They're essentially working with data as scientists. But when you start to learn a more dynamic programming language and you want to work within a big technology team, they haven't done it before. And so you can immediately come in, do a brief 8-week training, and then you get to play in this whole production environment, which is very fun. The other thing that we do is there's a lot of code school students who will go through training, which costs a lot of money. They usually take off 3 to 6 months to retrain and then get into a new career. But we find that a general approach to teaching people to code is not enough. Having the applied experience that you would hope to be able to get work and that they'll train you on the job, actually, the market's starting to, for junior developers, it's pretty competitive. And so you need to have something which you get experience and also can show off your work. So we take in a lot of code school students. And then we always have people who are continuously learning and they're at their jobs, and that this is like supplemental recreation training. Yes?
How do you pick your problems? So the decision process?
Well, for the time being, it varies, but right now we're interested in working with early adopters, which are willing to have people that work as staff inside of a government bureau that will want to do this enough that they come out on their own time and will train with us and will be part of the team. That we're asking for a high level of commitment and inclusion. And the other thing that you have to think about is that the thing that makes it work is that when I talk to, let's say the budget office, the city of Portland, which is not a hugely hot topic, but they have critical information, budgets of interest to a lot of people, that they have not a lot of ways of clearly communicating, especially visually, the budget. And I could tell them, hey, I've got maybe 40, 50 software engineers that would love to come and work on this with you if you would take the time to do it with us. And they say, really? And then on the other end, all of the dev team is like, oh, the budget office is going to come out. I get to work with the budget director. They're like, wow. And so everybody's happy. So you have to come up with these things that are a call to action where you get both sides to meet. And as long as people are willing to step up to the plate and the challenge is interesting enough, and maybe it's a topic or a theme, but maybe it's also creative approaches to technology. With this budget project, this is a sneak peek, I think that we're going to be definitely creating a visual interface for what the budget is today, but we have budget data that has not ever been machine readable. It is from the founding of Portland back in the 1800s. So we're going to bring that all online and tell the history of Portland and the budget through mixed media and sound and visualization there. So we can go very high concept art. So there's some people that might not have thought they cared about budget data, but they want to learn how to do this. So that's another driver sometimes. Yeah.
Two questions for you. I'll ask you to advise on this. So I come from the state of New Orleans.
And so there's a lot of work going on to improve how the city is governed through data. But we run into some issues. Number one, the data is not necessarily an accurate reflection of reality. So for example, New Orleans Police Department data on 911 calls, response times have improved for some calls, but that's because they reprioritize some calls to be less urgent so that it appears that the response times have improved, while many of the calls went on unanswered. And number two is while we have data professionals working in subject matter areas, so we got a non-profit for transport, they take the Regional Transit Association authorities data and do their timetables, predict things. We have got an environmental group who works with public licensing of litter extractions. They scrape the data and visualize it. People haven't really come together. It seems like there's we have this show to try and get people together in one place. How have your experience, I guess, tackled on your own on these issues?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll try to be brief, but you and I could talk more after the session. I think that the biggest thing is that even though a lot of this data is public, or let's even say that data doesn't exist, but that if it did exist, it would probably be public, there is a fear around opening it up. And that fear is not necessarily always rational. What government often doesn't realize is that they are the #1 users of their own data. We're addressing an issue right now with transportation, where we have an early adopter with the Portland Department of Transportation, which is going to be heading up a lot of road construction this year. More road construction than ever in the history of Portland. There are 2 other bureaus that also do road construction, but they aren't working with us as an early adopter. The road construction, there is no database for this. They are constantly communicating with each other over the phone, these 3 bureaus, and sometimes they'll even show up all on one site and somebody has to go home. They're trying to catch up with the logistics of not only their own planning, but of their different construction partners, things that change all the time. When we are able to create a database for the Portland Transportation Department, then we will show the other 2 bureaus, like, hey, don't you want to just put your data in this so you can share it with PBOT? And we can save a lot of money by coordinating our logistics better, or we can model out what the different traffic or closures or parking obstructions will be. You're doing this all the time on the phone anyhow, and it's highly imperfect. And I think that right now it's just hard to imagine sometimes how they are the biggest beneficiary of opening up the data. And if they could maybe afford to hire out and build their dream app for themselves to do this and keep it internal, maybe that would be their preference, but they don't have the culture to be able to take an iterative approach to product design and to building software. They want to take 2 years to form a committee to fund something and then think that they'll use it for 15 years. And that's different than how technology as an industry approaches things. I think that's about the end of the time. One more? Okay. Does anyone have one? Okay.
I'm curious about how the word hack has worked for you and students.
Well, we're in Portland, and it's been, I think people are pretty open-minded about it. It's called Hack Oregon just because I never had the experience of it being a bad term. It was always something that was very fun. We're taking things apart and repurposing them, and it feels a little bit, it's not meant to be challenging. It's just that we feel independent, and that fundamentally, I should also say that Hack University, we do charge for it, even though it's part of our nonprofit, and it keeps us about 80% independent, so that we do feel like we can keep our work unbiased, and that we're really accountable to the people who are building it and that round table of strategy. And that is a very different way than most profits work. we're working with the government in a way they're not used to working, and all industry as well. So it feels like we're hacking the system a bit, and it's very positive.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks.